Hello, Year 6. Welcome back to Storytime. Today, we are on Chapter 6 of Sky Circus. So, if you remember from yesterday, the children and Tolly and Malkin had gone to the circus, and they'd watched a number of acts, and there were some hybrids, as they're referred to in the text, some characters who were part human, part mechanical, and then Angelique has come out. And she has come out with wings, which I believe Lily is very excited about. So we'll have to see what happens next. Lily's eyes were pinned to Angelique, who was framed in the spotlight. Glass beads twinkled in her thick, fuzzy plaits of hair, which wound about the top of her head like a halo, and her wide chestnut eyes were highlighted by the shimmering colours of her costume that stood out against her brown skin. The dark feathers of her wings pinned to her back wavered as if blown by a soft breeze. This was who they'd been waiting for. Lily was so entranced by Angelique, she barely heard the loud, low gasp of Tolly in the seat beside her. "I recognise that girl," Tolly said. "I didn't realise it before from the invitation. The picture was too small and blurry, but she used to live in the Camden workhouse. Her name was Angela in them days, not Angelique, and she never had them wings." He shook his head in marvel. "We were friends back then, her and me, although we hardly talked. I used to send her food up in a basket and messages too, sometimes, to the attic where she lived. One day she went missing. I asked the other orphans what happened, but none of them knew. She'd just disappeared." The music gradually built as Angelique hauled herself up the ladder, rung by rung. Her body was tall and straight and regal, but beneath her smile was a slight wince that suggested she found the ascent painful, and Lily observed that she used her left leg more than her right to climb. Tolly had noticed too. "She broke that leg working for Miss Cleaver." "Who's Miss Cleaver?" Robert asked, watching Angelique with bated breath. "The woman that ran the orphanage," Tolly explained. His rapt eyes followed Angelique. "She told us she was sending Angela to be looked after in a hospital for a while. Then a lady came and took her away, and we never saw her again. And in all my days, I'd have never imagined she'd end up here, working in the circus, and with wings and all. You'd have thunk it." He whistled softly to himself. Lily felt the scars over her heart itch. "When was all this, Tolly?" she asked. 5 years ago. Angela weren't half brave then," Tolly replied, jiggling nervously in his seat. Still is, it seems." Lily saw that he was right. The higher Angelique rose from the ground, the more buoyant she became, and the more she seemed to swell with confidence. It was as if being up in the air made her more herself. By now she had reached the edge of the platform, and she threw out one hand, waving to the audience, giving a bright, confident salute to match the beaming smile radiating from her face. "You're sure Angela and Angelique are one and the same person?" Robert asked. Tolly nodded. "Sure as eggs is eggs. I'd remember her anywhere. Seared into my memory, she is. Face of an angel." Angelique leaped nimbly from the top of the ladder onto the hanging platform. With a dreamy air, she dipped her hands in a tin box attached to the platform, and then clapped them together, spraying white chalk like fairy dust through the air. She grasped the trapeze and flipped onto the bar. Then she opened her wings and flapped them wildly until the trapeze began to sway back and forth. As the rhythm of its movement became faster, Angelique sprang to her feet on the bar. On the next forward swing, she let go with her hands and fell backwards, hooking her feet around the corners where the ropes met the bar. Hanging upside down, her wings streamed behind her like a cape of feathers. Lily watched entranced. She was so busy following the girl's flowing movements that she forgot all about the questions in her head. Angelique beat her wings hard and fast. The trapeze swung even higher, reaching the zenith of its arc. 50 feet away, was another trapeze that sat empty and entirely still. Angelique had it in her sights. It was clear that she was going to jump between them. An impossibly dangerous distance. A daredevil deed. On the ground, Slimwood waved up at the empty trapeze. "Ladies and gentlemen, don't take your eyes off Miss Angelique Earhart for 1 second. She's about to attempt the impossible quadruple somersault with no safety net. Drum roll, please." The drum played a steady pitter-pattering beat. For one last time, in the tense, star-spangled heights, Angelique swung forward on her bar and made a leap of faith. Whir-tick went her fluttering wing rotors. Whoosh went her feathers. Lily's heart screamed in anticipation. Her scars itched. A lump lodged in her throat. Angelique somersaulted through the air, her wings streaming behind her, the spotlight following. It seemed for an instant as if she wasn't going to make it. She was a second too long in free fall, her plumage a mere decoration, incapable of keeping her up. She tried to grab for the other trapeze, but missed. Lily gasped. Robert wrung his hands together and Tolly let out a horrified yell, joined by the cries of an audience as Angelique tumbled towards the ring. Then, suddenly, a second from hitting the sawdust, she sprang to life. Flapping her wings and swooping upwards to circle around the edge of the tent. It had been a pretense. "Wow," Tolly gabbled. "I ain't never seen the like. She can really fly." Robert wanted to reply, but he had no words. He could only reply in relief. Then, the entire audience were on their feet, whooping ecstatically and laughing in maniacal release. Lily felt a bubble of joy burst inside her, and she stood and joined in the rapturous rounds of applause. Angelique was astonishing. She had performed her own dazzling hybrid miracle. Every head turned to follow her as she soared through the air, swooping about the canvas rooftop and basking in the adulation. She looked entirely relaxed. Her flapping wings beat slower with each twirl until her movements became leisurely, as if she was gliding through water. She frolicked through the air like a fish swimming in the sea, a butterfly drunk on pollen, or an eagle soaring in the sky, hovering on the strength of her wings, an angel in flight. Finally, she dived down and alighted, with a perfect puff of sawdust, at the edge of the ring, where she bobbed low and picked up a walking stick that must have been left there for her. She pulled herself up to her full height, chin lifted and proud, and leaning on her stick, she stretched her wings out wide and took a bow. The crowd cheered crazily as Angelique hobbled to the center of the ring, smiling and waving to everyone. But within moments, the cheers began to die down, and Lily heard the return of the gossipy chat. The applause had become a mere smattering. It seemed to Lily as if Angelique's smile didn't quite reach her eyes, and as she reached the backstage curtain, Lily saw her mask of joy fall completely. Angelique stepped from the spotlight and was smoothly replaced by Slimwood and Madame Lion's Mane. "That was our last act of the night," Slimwood shouted. Every eye was on him now, but Lily's. So only she saw the outside of the spotlight, framed between the closing curtains. The lunk appeared at Angelique's side. "Please could you make your way quietly to the exits as soon as the house lights come back on," Madame Lion's Mane added. Lily watched Angelique shrink back as the metal man grasped her arm. Her shoulders hunched and her wings drooped, their tips grazing the ground. She stared desperately out through the closing velvet drapes, and her eyes widened in alarm. Lily followed her darting gaze and realized she must have caught the sight of Tolly. Then the lunk pulled her back, and the curtains swished together, and they were gone, leaving only Slimwood and Madame Lion's Mane in the ring. None of the other acts returned to take a bow, but Slimwood and Madame Lion's Mane seemed happy to accept the applause on everyone's behalf. "Did you see that?" Lily cried. when the pair had finally finished bowing? Tolly nodded. I think she recognised me. And that mechanical was hurting her. It can't be, Robert said. Mechanicals don't hurt humans. Where'd you hear such stories? Tolly asked. My dad told me, Robert said. It's the first law of mechanics. A mech can't kill humans or seriously harm them. It's part of their design, built into their valves and circuits. I'm not so sure, Lily said. I think Tolly might be right. Angelique didn't look happy. Joey and Oggy, the clowns, were trundling round the ring, relighting the oil lamps. The crowd stood and began filing towards the doors. Robert, Tolly and Lily put on their coats and buttoned them. Robert wedged his cap back on, and Lily wound Mrs. Rust's long tiger-striped scarf round her neck. She left the wilting flowers and took out her repaired pocket watch to check the time. 8:32, she told the others. I know Rusty said we had to be back by 9, but the party's bound to go on until midnight, and I really think we should find Angelique and see if she's all right. Maybe get some answers about all this too, like we were promised. But how are we going to talk to Angelique if the lunk's guarding her? Tolly asked. Lily shook her head. I don't know. Lily, I've got a bad feeling about this place, Robert butted in. The atmosphere's creepy, and we should be getting back to your pa's speech. If we go now, we can still get home in time to make it seem as if we were never away. We could leave Angelique a letter, find someone here we trust and ask them to give it to her. Perhaps the ring mistress. Lily remembered Madame Lionsmane had told her to come look for her after the show. She glanced about and spotted the bearded lady clutching her parasol next to Slimwood by the tent's exit, shaking hands and waving goodbye to the crowd. Madame Lionsmane seemed to feel Lily's gaze, for she turned and stared back across the dimly lit tent. And to Lily it felt like the woman's eyes were boring straight into her soul. Maybe it's not such a good idea to ask her for help, she muttered. Personally, I didn't like the mugs on any of them, Tolly said. And now I've seen her, I don't think I can leave Angelique in this place without checking she's not in trouble. I'm not sure if it's safe to go behind the curtain, Robert said. Who knows what we might find? Best if we sneak out round the back among the crowds, Tolly suggested. Is it me, Lily said, or are the circus folk watching us? Robert flicked a glance around the ring from under the peak of his cap. They have been the whole evening, he muttered. Something's up with this place, with all of them. It's almost as if they're waiting for a big occurrence to happen. A throng of villagers were still making their way to the exit, while some rough-looking, heavy-set men, dressed in regular clothes, had appeared from behind the curtain and began to upend and fold down the empty benches to cart them away. Lily still couldn't work out who'd sent Mamma's notebook and invited her here. If it wasn't Angelique, then was it one of the others? Madame Lionsmane or Slimwood, even the lunk? Or those two stupid clowns who'd made a big fuss of her when she'd arrived, and who seemed to be keeping an eye on her now as they went about helping to dismantle the show. She thought again of the rhyme on the card that had arrived with the ticket and red notebook. We have a simple question, and it's one that's not a trick. Some of us are wondering, what is it that makes you tick? The answer, the cog-heart, felt suddenly fraught with danger. The professor at the party had said there were only a handful of hybrids in England, 3 of which, including Angelique, Lily had just seen being treated badly in the show. With an overwhelming rush of nausea, Lily realised it could mean only one thing. She'd been invited here tonight because she was a hybrid too, and somehow, she wasn't quite sure how, the circus folk knew it and had made plans for her. Mind your backs, said one of the men loudly, ripping up the bench at her side. Lily glanced round and saw they were the last 3 members of the audience left in the tent. Where's Malkin? She asked suddenly. For they had been getting ready to leave for quite a while, and he'd been remarkably quiet. It wasn't like him not to give a running commentary on everything. Maybe he'd wound down and fallen asleep beneath the bench. She bent down to look for him, but he wasn't there. "Malkin's gone!" Lily cried hoarsely, her throat constricting in alarm. Panic twisted like a broken glass wind chime in her chest. Where could he be? She felt ill thinking of him wandering round this suspicious place on his own. Anything might have happened to him. All of a sudden, she wasn't sure what to do. Part of her still wanted to find Angelique, but if they didn't recover Malkin and get home in time for the end of the party, Papa would discover they were missing and they'd be in even more trouble. "Malkin!" she called out. Then she put her fingers in her mouth and gave a piercing whistle. "Malkin!" Robert yelled, squinting across the dark tent. "Malkin! Here, boy!" Solly brushed his hair out of his face with the back of his hand. Robert wasn't sure the fox would respond to a call like that, but it was worth a go. They waited, listening for Malkin's shrill bark, but it never came, and his bright red brush was nowhere to be seen. The worry was suffocating. Lily could barely breathe. She loosened her scarf. Her eyes darted desperately about the tent, scanning the blurred silhouettes of the heavy-set men who were busy pulling up benches, ignoring their cries of alarm. In the same instant, Slimwood dropped the flap across the exit, while Madame Lionsmane held up her parasol and let it fall sharply to the ground, at which signal the men all turned ominously towards Lily and her friends, dropping what they were doing and coming for them. Lily's heart beat, loud as a drum. They had been tricked. Right. Well, thank you very much for joining me again. Tomorrow, I will continue chapter 7.